guys, I am Dr. Rhodes with Rhodes Equine Veterinary Service. I hope you all had a fantastic day. It sure was a gorgeous day, and oh my God, was it cold out there. I hope that you guys all got to stay cuddled up in your homes and stayed warm today because it was pretty nasty out. I might have mentioned this once or twice before, but I really, really hate the cold. This is not my favorite kind of weather to work in, but alas, here I am. So, temperatures in recent days have been what even I would call excessive. I don't tend to get too worked up over like 30 degrees or just below freezing, even 20s. Yeah, that's cold, but I mean, like, I don't know that I would call that excessive. Temperatures in recent days have been excessive. We're talking below zero. I was a little kid the last time I could appreciate temperatures this cold. So it's not a happy week for me, or well, many of you, and probably several of you are probably, I hope, concerned about your horses out there. Horses are very cold adapted animals. They do tolerate the cold a lot better than we do, but with the temperatures that we have been having, they're not used to it, and boy, this is really even cold for what their bodies can handle easily. So I wanted to go over my top 5 tips and strategies to keeping your horses healthy as you enter the winter. I know this is the end of winter, but as you enter the winter, when you get into these cold spells, in any case. All right, top 5 strategies. All right, so number 5, okay? Consider blanketing your horses. I'm not actually a big blanketer. Like, I don't typically blanket my horses. I have this morbid fear that a leg or a foot is gonna get caught in my blanket, and horses have this nasty habit of being able to use really surprising things to saw their limbs all the way down to the bone. It happens. I've seen some bad things in my career that is not as long as some and longer than others. So I don't particularly care for blankets just willy-nilly. However, there was a study that was published back in November from Wisconsin, where they measured the amount of hay that horses voluntarily ate free choice over the course of the winter months. And they compared horses that had blankets to horses that didn't have blankets. And what they noticed is that horses that didn't have blankets ate about 8% more hay than the horses that did. Now, what kind of information can we extrapolate from that? Well, so when a horse is cold and they're having trouble maintaining their internal body heat, they actually seek out forage. Forage keeps them warm. Hay particularly keeps them warm, and so they'll try to eat much more of it. So when you have a group of horses that's voluntarily eating less over these cold months, that would suggest, which you will very rarely hear me use any more certainty of a word other than suggest. Science suggests and supports, it doesn't prove. So that would strongly suggest that those horses were warmer, that they were not as cold, and so they did not have the drive to seek out forage as much as their unblanketed counterparts that ate more hay. So that would be supportive of the idea that a blanket can effectively maintain an internal warmth in a measurable fashion. As you know, like I said, horses are cold adapted. When you get a larger volume, surface area to volume ratio goes down. So, you know, whereas we go outside in temperatures like this, we're immediately froze without 15 layers of stuff on us. There's a horse, they're a much larger animal, and a much smaller proportion of their body is actually exposed to the environment. So I've always kind of been skeptical that a blanket really does much in an animal that size, but apparently it does do something. So why am I spouting off about this? Well, if you have a horse that is otherwise compromised, so a young horse like a foal or a weanling, an old horse about-ish over the age of 20, senior horse has a little bit of, there is no hard set definition of senior horse. It means something different to everyone. And you know what, frankly, they all age differently when they get up into that period of their life. So we're gonna just kind of, for all intents and purposes, say greater than 20 is an aged horse, and they're gonna be a little bit more, have a little bit more difficulty maintaining their internal state. And then one other group, which might be the most important one of all, is horses of a lean body condition score, so a 4 or less. Why do I point this out? Well, staying warm takes a massive amount of calories. Like, shivering uses a lot of your body's energy stores. And the reason why it does, your cells are basically just taking that energy and burning it off for the sake of creating heat, trying to maintain an internal body temperature. So for a horse that's a 5 or more on a body condition score, so perfect body condition to more than that, those horses, they're probably going to maintain just fine and not have a whole bunch of an issue. A little bit of loss in body condition is not going to be super noticeable. A 4 or less, though, well, healthy body condition is between 4 and 6. So if you go below a 4, that is not a healthy body condition by definition. You don't want those horses losing weight. Those horses are already probably a 4 because they're actually probably difficult to keep weight on to begin with. Most horses are really easy keepers. 4s are not usually easy keepers. So you want to try to preserve those energy stores in those horses as much as possible. So if your horse is a hard keeper, or it's just one of those horses that is a little bit leaner than the rest of his herd mates, those horses, you should consider keeping a blanket on them over the winter, just because it reduces the calories that their body needs to stay warm, or it reduces the need for those calories to stay warm. It actually keeps them a little bit warmer, so they're not spending as much calories, so that you can focus on maintaining their body weight instead of, well, using all of those calories and that energy to stay warm. So number 5, consider blanketing your horses, particularly your old, young, and thin horses. All right, number 4. So this one might not be quite so relevant for this this current moment because we're almost at the end of winter. But next winter, think about it. You should check your horse's weight once a month. I talked about not liking blankets particularly much. Another problem that they can cause is they hide your horse's body condition. Now, your horse's body condition already hides between a really thick coat of hair. It's hard to assess him. You see them out there grazing and you think they look fine. You can't see their ribs, you can't see their hips, and then they shed out that winter coat, or you rip that blanket off, and you're embarrassed to let anyone see them. Okay, this happens to me. Has happened to me. I have a skinny old thoroughbred who also happens to be the only horse out in my field that has a blanket on right now. It happens. It is really important to put your hands on your horse and actually do a body condition. Feel his neck, feel the crest of his neck, feel what kind of fat content you have there. Feel his ribs, feel his spine, and then feel the tail head where fat accumulates. You should be able to feel a layer of fat between the skin and his rib cage. You should be able to feel fat between his ribs. You should be able to also feel his ribs without having to push down really hard. I should be able to kind of just rub my fingers and just kind of feel those ribs bump underneath my fingers as I go. That's a good body condition. It's not too fat and not too thin. And you should do this once a month. And another objective measure that you can use, get a weight tape. They're super cheap online. You can get them from a lot of tech stores, and a lot of feed stores will give them to you for free because feed manufacturers love to sell weight tapes. They love to give them away with their brand and logo on top. Purina has a bunch of them. So get yourself a weight tape, and once a month put that on your horse and check his weight. Make sure that he's not gaining or losing weight, because the opposite does happen over the winter months too. Your easy keeper will put the pounds on if he has free choice access to, say, a round bale or something like that. So check your horse's body condition once a month. That'll help keep him out of the danger zones for founder when you go into the spring, and that'll also kind of help prevent you from getting that skinny horse when they shed out. And that would be the number 4 piece of advice on my list. All right, ready? Number 3, shelter. Your horses should have continuous access to shelter when they are turned out. And you probably should turn them out too. I'm not a proponent of keeping them indoors. I think that that also causes its own degree of problems and maladies. And like I said, horses are actually cold adapted. Just because we're cold outside doesn't mean that they are. That doesn't apply to them. They have a slightly different set of adaptations that really make them function much better in the cold. We are not cold adapted. Horses are. So I do suggest turning them out. But, however, they should have access to shelter. They should be able to get out of the wetness that falls from the sky, so sleet and rain and snow and all of that fun stuff. They should be able to get away from that. And I think this often gets overlooked. They need to be able to get out of the wind too. A lot of man-made structures are poorly designed. My husband is a farmer. I love farmers dearly, and my husband is not one of these farmers, but you will see a lot of those man-made structures that are like dead set open to this awful northern wind. What good does that do? It doesn't do a whole lot of good. Because now that horse, in order to get out of the rain, he must stand in this shelter that is acting like this big fan conduit to blow cold air on him and all of that fun stuff. That's not exactly helpful. So they need to be able to get out of the wind. Also, keep in mind that a good thick portion of woods, and I'm not talking just 2 or 3 trees, I'm talking to like thick woods, that can also serve as a shelter. I know that a lot of people look negatively on that, but boy, sometimes some of these shelters I've seen, sometimes those woods provide better cover for horses than, well, you know, that northern facing run-in shed. So those trees and the brush down low act as a windbreak, especially if you're kind of down in a little valley where you've also got the hill acting as a windbreak. That's all good circumstances. We will see our cattle kind of hiding in those woods frequently enough, just because that's a good place to get out of the wind and the elements. So woods do count, and just make sure that your horse has shelter from wind and, well, water that comes from the sky, rain, sleet, and snow. So that's number 3, shelter. All right, the number 2 thing that I think is important, and this is incredibly important in my book as far as cold weather and winter care, and this is particularly relevant for this moment now because most of these horses are not adapted to sub-zero temperatures. They are adapted to 30s and 40s, just like us, because this is not normal for us, and this is definitely not normal for what we've had this year. It is cold. So the number 2 thing on my list, continuous access to forage, namely hay. Horses, I alluded to this previously, horses are hindgut fermenters, contrasted to a cow, which is a foregut fermenter. In both of these species, they have this big, large, specialized pocket of the GI tract. In a cow, that's their rumen. In a horse, it's the large intestine. And this big structure, this vat, when these fibrous, tough forage components that these animals eat that they eat on a daily basis, it passes through the GI tract to get to this part, and it sits there for a while. And bacteria break that down into smaller components, and these animals absorb those nutrients, and that's why a horse can eat hay and get some nutritional value out of it, whereas that wouldn't work with us. We don't have any fermentation vats in our body our bodies cannot process and utilize that, and that's because we do not have the bacterial breakdown of those fibrous structures to produce nutrients. Okay, so why is this important in this case? Well, this process, fermentation, it produces heat. So literally, your horse has this big, large intestine that is, in the winter months, acting like a giant internal furnace fueled by hay. I say this a lot because it is what it is it's a furnace, an internal heat combustion chamber that you fuel with hay. So when temperatures are really cold like this, it is really important to utilize this means of staying warm. Leave hay in front of them continuously. Now, there are some exceptions to that. So, for example, when you have horses with insulin dysregulation due to metabolic syndrome or equine Cushing's disease, PPID, those horses have a sensitivity to the starches and the sugars that are in their diet, and you have to be really, really careful for them. In those particular cases, you need to talk to your veterinarian about these concerns, okay? Because that is something that can vary pretty greatly with how sensitive that individual is to those to sugars and starches. So, I mean, I can say as a general rule, I would tell you first and foremost to try to stretch their meals out. So you have X amount of pounds of hay that you're feeding. Okay, you still want to feed them those X amount of pounds, but see if you can't figure out a way to slow them down over the course of the day so that they're eating the same amount, but they're eating it all day long instead of like the 20 minutes after you fed. All right, and that works fine around here. That works fine for most of the winter, but then you get these little cold streaks like what's going on now, and that's you might have to take extra measures in that case. And again, really talk to your veterinarian about this, because some horses are really, really, really hypersensitive to sugars and starches, and you don't want to disrupt that. So you don't want to try and keep your horse warm and then end up with a bad laminitis episode. That you really need to talk to your vet about that. There are some solutions that you can do. You can test your hay, make sure that you're feeding really low starch hay. In some ponies, there's some evidence to suggest that mixing hay and straw together is a good way to get them to lose weight. Well, that would work in the case of this, because now they're nibbling. They have to work harder to get to the hay, and they're nibbling on other tough fibrous structures out of boredom and being cold and all of that fun stuff. And that's not going to cause the same kind of insulin spike that just increasing their hay to free choice is going to cause. But bottom line, you really need to discuss this with your vet, because I have no idea how sensitive your individual horse is to insulin, and that's between you and your vet to determine. Just point being, point being, sometimes you have to change your strategies a little bit when it gets cold like this, just to help your horse stay warm. So that's number 2, forage, provide forage. All right, and number 1. This, in my book, is probably the most important husbandry aspect of cold weather care. It is. I cannot hound on this enough. Water, all right? So, don't rely on natural sources of water to keep your horse hydrated when it gets like this, because that water gets cold and it ices over. Ponds and creeks are not okay as a sole source of water for horses in temperatures like this. They ice over, they're cold, and your horse doesn't want to drink ice water, even if it's not frozen through. And the other problem, frozen ponds are a death trap. I had this happen to me once, okay? My horse wandered out in the middle of a frozen pond and fell through the ice, and I had to call the fire department, and I had to call MERS to go out there and dig him out of this frozen pond. He should be dead right now, okay? Let me say this. If I had treated 50 of these horses, 49 of them would be dead, okay? I've watched reruns of those videos. He was dying as they were pulling him out of there. I understand. I know, okay, I know enough about vital signs to know that that horse was dying when they pulled him out of this pond, okay? Ponds are death traps, so your horses should not have access to frozen ponds. Just throwing that out there. Don't utilize natural sources of water. Make sure that you have fresh, ice-free water available to your horse. And it's more than just the accident of your horse going out into the middle of a frozen pond falling through the ice. It actually has more to do with horses drink more when water is warm, and probably of more significant concern to most of you is horses get infection colics when they don't drink enough water. So when it gets cold like this, you are faced with this conundrum. One, your horse's appetite goes way through the roof. He is eating every last little piece of hay that he can find on the ground in an attempt to stay warm. And in an attempt to stay warm, he's refusing to drink the ice water that is being presented to him. All right, and so now you have lots of dry ingesta and no water. And you can imagine that doesn't pass through the GI tract particularly well. And when your horse starts to get a little dehydrated and this all starts to build up on itself, you get this nice, lovely impaction. And these are not always fun to treat. Sometimes these take several days for me to treat if I get there fast enough, because some horses are stoic. They don't act colicky right away. It's a bad situation, so it's much better to avert it altogether. Offer your horse warm water twice a day. You know, if you have to carry a 5-gallon bucket out there to him a couple of times a day, that's really not that big of a deal, okay? Offer him some warm water at least a couple times a day, and make sure that they have continuous access to water without ice, free of ice, fresh water, okay? Continuous access to fresh water, and offer them warm water twice a day. If you have to increase their water consumption, you can add some salt to their feed. I don't think that that's a miracle worker, but sodium does drive the thirst reflex in mammals. So when you're dehydrated, the sodium in your blood is elevated, and after you've eaten a salty meal, the sodium in your blood is elevated. Well, we're just giving them a salty meal to try to make them want to drink more water. And that can work. However, they're still not going to drink more water if they're primarily concerned with keeping warm because they're cold. So you can do salt. don't put it in the water. Please don't do that. Not a good idea. That'll backfire on you a lot of the times. Those horses just won't drink that. But you can put it on their feed, and you can have a free choice salt block there for them to go after in their stall and when you turn them out. So the top 5, we've got blankets. We've got to check your horse's body condition and their weight. We've got shelter. We've got forage. And we've got water. The most important thing you can do when the temperatures drop like that is to make sure that your horse is properly drinking water. And if he's not, figure out a way to get it into him. Salt, soaked feeds, and offer them warm water. Right, I hope that you guys got something out of this. Do you guys have any fun hacks that you like when the weather gets cold? Please feel free to share them below. I'm always into new ideas on how to stay warm. I feel like a lot of the time equine husbandry is about taking good ideas and principles, like getting your horse to drink, and then being creative with them to make them work for your situation. Because all of our situations are, in fact, different, and some of the time we have to be a little bit creative and think outside the box to make it work right. So please share your comments below, and like, subscribe to my channel, and visit my website. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.